Well, I think it's going to be 2-1 here. By the way, is this on? I can't tell. Okay. When Chris said rule of law, and a person violates the law, therefore there's automatic consequences, that doesn't mean we necessarily take the most extreme enforcement policy. The person speeding, rule of law, the person speeding on Interstate 35, we would never say, you've sped, therefore you're perpetually barred from ever driving. We would give that person a ticket. There'd be we would act in some sort of a common sense way. It doesn't mean that you take the most extreme. Eddie pointed out, rightfully, the demographics, and Jose just mentioned about the various industries that are dependent. We have 11 million undocumented in the country. That's a rough sort of agreed upon figure, of which about 7 million plus are in the workforce. Chris's candidate, Mr. Trump, has actually, you must disagree, because he has called for mass deportation. And many times during the debates, he said, all of them have got to go. When asked at one point, what about the U.S. citizen kids, he said, they've got to go too. He mentioned 18 months. He created an internal police force to do that. Police force to do that. Assuming that was possible, and many people say, oh, well, he didn't mean it, just like everything else he says, he doesn't really mean it. But if he did mean it, if you could just pull 11 million people out of the economy, 2 million people or approximately out of the Texas economy, it would be not only a humanitarian disaster, breaking families, taking out the breadwinner in many cases, leaving U.S. citizen family members without any form of support, but it would wreck the economy. By the way, our comptroller in 2005, Carolyn Keaton, a great name, dean of the law school, Strayhorn said, undocumented immigrants contribute far more to the economy than they cost. These people buy products, they work, they provide services, but no one that I know supports illegal immigration. The problem is there is no legal system that recognizes the reality. By the way, if the restriction is, and I'm just sort of thrilled we have the number one in America right here, had their way, they would remove 11 million people. What would have happened during the 90s up through well into the 2000s, when we were effectively at zero unemployment? You remove 11 million workers. It would have been an economic disaster. So we can walk and chew gum. Yes, we should have effective border enforcement, but to do that, when I worked for George W. Bush, the first thing he said is, why should we have the Border Patrol out there game tackling, because that's what they used to do when they were flooding the zone, someone's favorite nanny or strawberry picker? Why don't we route good people into a legal system? That's what immigration reform is all about, and that's what the restriction is. They only want to talk about the enforcement. They won't talk about what the real problem is, that we have this problem because there's no legal system. Let's fix the legal system, and we can, by the way, when the 2008 bill was passed with the Gang of Eight, including Marco Rubio famously supporting that, they had triggers in that. Those provisions weren't going to go into effect until we reached a certain level of enforcement. So we can do both of those things. It just doesn't have to be restriction all the time. But if you follow the restrictionists, as I do, the truth is they don't like legal immigration either. The organizations for which Chris has worked as general counsel, if you watch their ads, they're against all immigration, legal and illegal. Do I have any time left?
Well, I don't know which organizations or which ads you're talking about, but regardless, but the point is, I believe we have to have legal immigration, but the legal immigration should be in the national interest, and it shouldn't be in a way that displaces American workers. Now, I'll just quickly rebut Charles' points. He says we need more workers, we can't remove the 11 million, and he echoed the demographic meltdown issue that we saw in the previous speaker, which, by the way, is fascinating. I am very interested in that. But let me talk to that. So, the 11 million, would they, first of all, not all of them are in the workforce. A minority of them are in the workforce, actually. It's about 4 million in the workforce. Many of them are dependents of people who are working in the United States. So we're really talking about 4 million. So let's get that straight. Secondly, we've got 20 million plus US citizens who are either unemployed or underemployed or have dropped out of the labor force. So you've got a huge number of US citizens that aren't working right now. And so we have to keep that in mind. But let me just go to a quote that if you've never heard this, you need to hear it and just think about it, from the Nobel Prize winning economist Milton Friedman. He said this. He said, "It's just obvious. You can't have open immigration and a welfare state." You can't have open immigration and a welfare state. Now, all of our previous waves of immigration in American history, pre-1965, were into a country that was not a welfare state. Now we have a pretty much sustained wave of both legal and illegal combined that really hasn't led up into the biggest welfare state in the Western Hemisphere. So we have a problem. The welfare state attracts and encourages people to remain, but the welfare state also becomes unsustainable the more you bring in uneducated, low-skilled, it doesn't matter what part of the world you come from, but a welfare state depends on people having productivity. And that gets to the point I want to make about, okay, well, but you might think, well, we need the illegal labor because we've got that demographic meltdown and we've got to sustain our social security system. I sure want to have benefits when I retire, right? So let's have more labor come in. No, you shouldn't think just in terms of raw numbers of people. Just bringing in more people won't necessarily solve the issues of your welfare state. We could bring in the entire population of, pick any poor nation on the planet, the entire population of Uganda. You pick up a nation and bring it here. That won't solve our problem. That'll increase your national GDP, but it won't increase your per capita GDP. Your per capita GDP will go down, and your nation will be poorer. You have to, and we have the ability in the United States to bring in people from anywhere in the world who have the greatest abilities in the world because we are such a desirable nation to come into. So we need to think smartly about our demographic issues that we face. And then one other point, which I bet many people know this, but it's especially important to say it here in McAllen. The U.S.-Mexico border is interesting. It is unique among national borders on the planet. It has the greatest disparity in per capita GDP of any border on the globe, as the rich country and the poor country, which is why there's such an huge economic pressure pushing so much legal and illegal immigration north. Okay, and I want to quickly go to something Jose said about the vulnerable workers. I completely agree. And there's huge exploitation of people who are working illegally in the United States. But we also have to think about when an illegal worker comes in, who is displaced. Now, in every study that's been done of this, the impact of the job displacement falls most heavily on whom? On Hispanic U.S. citizens, and second most heavily on African American U.S. citizens. And so you're bringing in an illegal workforce that is displacing, in many cases, a first-generation American-born U.S. workforce. And there's another misconception out there. You often hear the phrase that, frankly, George Bush said it, and he was wrong. He said there are jobs Americans won't do. Now, that's statistically false. If you look at U.S. Census figures, and I'll end on these figures, the American Community Survey surveys people who are native-born U.S. citizens and people who moved to the United States, and they use native-born because that's just the count that the census has done forever, and it would be useful if they changed it. But here are the numbers. In 2014, now these are fields you would think that are mostly illegal aliens, or at least mostly aliens, legal and illegal combined. In the field of janitorial services and building cleaning, the percentage that are native-born U.S. citizens, what do you think it is? 73% native-born U.S. citizens. In construction, something Jose was talking about, what percent do you think are native-born U.S. citizens? 65%. So U.S. citizens are working in those dangerous jobs at a lower wage, competing directly with the illegal labor. In food preparation, oh, that's got to be very tiny, right? 79% of food preparation workers in the United States, native-born U.S. citizens. These are Census Bureau numbers. And lastly, agriculture. Agricultural labor, and agriculture covers a wide variety, so it's not just picking vegetables, but we're talking about, driving combines in the Midwest too. Total percentage, 54% are native-born U.S. citizens. So U.S. citizens are working in those jobs at a lower wage because of the exploitation of the illegal labor that will work for a very low wage. And so US citizens are hurting too, and it's our objective when we do an immigration policy in our national interest that we look after our US citizens first. Regardless of where they come from, regardless of whether they're naturalized, regardless of their skin color, we must always look after our own first. By definition, if we are a nation that is sovereign and is trying to protect its own people.
Thanks, Chris. Jose, 3 minutes.
Just 3
And
minutes.
then I'm gonna slow it down. We're just gonna push through this, and then we'll have plenty of time to have a discussion in the whole room.